Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Holy Spirit, increase in our souls your divine gifts, which, as blessed instincts of grace, mercifully impel us to approve the better things. We beseech you, O God, that the Holy Spirit, who proceeds from you, may enlighten our minds and lead us all to truth, as your Son promised. Holy Spirit of truth, through your most precious gift, teach our erring souls both to know and to love the divine will in all things, and thereby lead us safely through the dangers of life and to our eternal Father, through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So, it has been said that the Crusades are the most known and most misunderstood era in our history. People like to dismiss it, say it was just kind of a blurb in history. We don't like to talk about it. It was over 700 years, so it's a big blurb. But we have the various things that kind of set it up. And a lot of things is that a great number of things were misunderstood or not actually just plain out lied. Upon that, there's been a great renewal of study and understanding of it because people have actually gone back to see, look, well, let's look and see what the people were saying at the time and look at the books from then instead of continually looking at the histories from the period of the Enlightenment. Because in the Enlightenment, they took the cause of saying, we don't like the Catholic Church, which everybody kind of remembers that part. And then they just said, well, the Crusades were done by the Catholics. The Crusades were evil, and they were horrible people, and all these things happened. And this is actually where we get most of our history from it. But now if you go and look into most scholars of the day, they say that most of the stuff people have been taught, like that little blurb of, it was a bad thing, it was for territory, money, and all this stuff, was absolutely false. And if you ask any professional historian, they'll say, yeah, that's absolutely true. Because no historian now worth his salt would actually say that now. Because they know it's absolutely and completely false. So now let's hit that one up. It's like, whatever you learned in the past, more than likely was quite inaccurate. Some of the books that actually would be really good, if you ever want to go look at history, this one is a little, not too terribly thick, but it's very well written, and it's written in a fashion where it's not like, on this date at this time, this happened, this happened, this happened. It's not like one of those histories that you basically have to feel like you're pulling teeth just to get finished. It's The New Concise History of the Crusades by Dr. Thomas Madden. Actually, I know him. All his children are bright redheads. He's also bright redheaded, fair to say. So his book is really well. Many of the acclaimed historians at the time said it's one of the best concise writings that has come out today. So this is one of the better ones. He was one of the chairs of professors at the University of St. Louis, and also he's good friends with Dr. Hitchcock, if you know who he is. He's one of the historians who wrote the History of the Catholic Church, another recent book that came out, which is about that thick. But it's actually quite concise because it's literally going through the entirety of the history of the Catholic Church up to now. So it's not going to be like thick and thorough on every topic, but it gives you enough to where you actually kind of know what's going on in each period of time. And one semester, our professor of history at the seminary was going to go on sabbatical for a semester. And so he's like, oh, I got one of my friends to come over and teach. I'm like, okay. It's Dr. Hitchcock. We're just like, he's won all those awards and he's world famous and all this stuff for all this, and he's gone to teach all this stuff. It's like, yeah, he's coming in to sub for me. So we were just like, okay, we're going to bring our books and we're going to get them signed by him. So we had that moment to where we're just kind of staring at the entire time. So anyway, we had all those. This one, like I said, very, very, very good book. Very easily to read, and I'll let people look at it after. I'll pass it around. But the second one is the myth of the Eleusinian paradise. Muslims, Christians, and Jews under Islamic rule in medieval Spain. It's a slightly bit thicker. It is, I didn't name the author. He is Spanish, so. Fernando Fernandez Merora. He is one of the foremost in the Middle Ages in Spain. People like from Brown University, from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, also the University of Spain in Navarre, everybody knows Navarre, and Portugal, and yet various universities in Portugal, and also the Historical Society in Yale. So he's like incredibly accredited, meaning that people are like, it looks threatening and thick, but a large chunk of that is the back little footnotes. So you can say the third half of the book is nothing but annotated notes and such. So that takes a little bit of thread out of it. And the third book that I have up here, besides the other history book by Dr. Hitchcock, which I did not bring with me, is Bearing False Witness, Debunking Centuries of Anti-Catholic History by Rodney Stark. Basically going over through all the various myths that have been brought up the years, just, against Catholics, and a lot of things we don't really know that were actually anti-Catholic propaganda from the beginning. Case in point, the Crusades during the Enlightenment. That's actually where we got the beginning of it.
Fake news, huh?
I'm not going to go on that stand, but yes, you can go. But one of the things was, actually, I shouldn't say Enlightenment, it actually, part of it started with Martin Luther and then went on from there. But this is a really, really good book. It's very concise, it's easy to get through, and Boston College, various other things. George Weigel, commented on this book and various things, but he's very well known in writing history. He's a very good historian. He has written a lot of books. You can Google him and find like a trillion things that he wrote. But he's very good about concisely analyzing it with a little bit of humor in it. I wouldn't say it's polemical, but he kind of pokes fun at a couple of things, just for the sake of. He does it incredibly academic and dry way, let's put it that way. So it's just like, that's, it's one of those, I have to think about this for a second. Oh, I got it. So that's kind of set the stage of the various things in back materials, because there's no possible way I can go over all this. But we will attempt. Okay, now, okay, well, there were 6 Crusades. Now, some of them were not exactly called, but there are 6 that are remembered, and there's, 8 that are the official 8 Crusades. There were a great number more, but they weren't what people normally think of crusade. There were some in France, there were some in Spain, there were some, they were crusading all over the place, and it was not just, let's go east. It was, let's go west, let's go sometimes to the north, let's go a little bit to the south, 2 miles down the road, So crusade wasn't even actually called crusade. It was, first it was called basically pilgrimage. But later on it kind of took on later on as in the second through the 8th, it changed a little less pilgrimagey to more of the, okay, we've got a really big problem that we need to deal with, or reactionary. What I'm going to focus on is the kind of setting up the beginnings of the Crusades and how it was provoked, let's put it that way. And then the fallout from it, and then the various things that kind of happened afterwards, and a little bit of what we understand of it today, and a little bit of how we know our take on it. Now, in starting this, I'm just going to first just kind of go through the list of the 8, just so the time period, so we kind of get a little idea of what the time is. The first crusade was officially from 1096 to 1099. The second was 1147 to 1148. Number 3 was 1189 to 1192. The fourth was 1200 to 1204. The fifth crusade was just the year 1212. That was the horribly misbegotten children's crusade. It was really led by anyone proper. A crazy person decided to do that one. That would have been like that. The sixth is 1219 through 1221, the 7th is 1229, and the 8th and final official crusade, as you might put from the official list, is 1248 to 1264. So this was a very long time period. And by crusade, it was not necessarily meaning that there wasn't things in between. There was lots of things in between and after, which I'm about to get to. Okay, the first part kind of set up the historical background of it. Well, let me go over some of the little facts first about what we see as the Crusades. I have a couple of quotes in here. One of the things that we hear a lot, and the myth of most of the Crusades, especially the first one, says that it was, and I'm quoting from a history, from somebody else's history, not his history, of him kind of setting the stage as well, because I thought these were very good quotes. He said, "Far from being motivated by piety or concern for the safety of pilgrims and the holy places of Jerusalem, the Crusades were but the first extreme bloody chapter in a long history of brutal European colonialism." So we're kind of setting the stage where this is histories written in the 1900s and going forward. And this is kind of a lot of people's view that this was fine. And we'll kind of get to the reason why this was. And some of you may have heard, former President Bill Clinton gave a speech at Georgetown University where he said that those of us who are from various European lineages are not blameless, meaning the Crusades, and then referring about how Crusaders were up to their knees in blood in Jerusalem, which was taken from a story written 300-400 years after the fact, saying that it was up to their ankles, and then one that was slightly early said it was up, they were walking through it. So it went from feet to ankles to your knees. So just kind of, just right.
You stated earlier that most of the information that someone like me has on the Crusade is probably incorrect or wrong. What I read and taught, whatever, was that the Crusades were sponsored by the monarchs and kings of the European countries and financed by them, and the knights were on loan to the Vatican. How much is it? Any of that true? A little bit.
It's pieces. It's kind of spliced together. But another one recently, and this is, you'll get where I'm going when I get to this one, because it'll start to get more understanding. In 1999, the New York Times solemnly proposed that the Crusades were comparable to Hitler or the ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. And then, and also in 1999, there were hundreds of devout Protestants who took part in what was called a reconciliation walk that began in Germany and went to the Holy Lands. Along the way, there were T-shirts with the message written in Arabic, "I apologize," on it, and walked into the city of Jerusalem. And this is part of their speech. 900 years ago, our forefathers carried the name of Jesus Christ in battle across the Middle East. Fueled by fear, greed, and hatred, the Crusaders lifted the banner of the cross above your people. On the anniversary of the First Crusade, we wish to reenact the footsteps of the Crusade in apology for their deeds. We deeply regret the atrocities committed in the name of Christ by our predecessors. We renounce greed, hatred, and fear, and condemn all violence done in the name of Jesus Christ. And basically, the idea and the thoughts that we have about the Crusades in most histories, or popular histories, were written in the Enlightenment period, which basically condemned the Western Crusades as something to do with greed, money, power, and so on and so forth. The main proponent of these things was Voltaire, who was notoriously not too happy with Catholics. He said, "I would rather kill priests and such, and all that lovely things." Let's see here.
Father, did you say the ones who took that walk to apologize, did you say they were mostly Protestants?
Yeah, it was a Protestant group that did it from Germany, so I'm assuming it was probably...
didn't
No.
initiate that?
Actually, in fact, point of fact that when Pope John Paul issued his apology for Christians throughout the ages thing, he never said anything about the Crusades, because he didn't think they were necessary to apologize. before. Now we're getting to that time period to where, okay. Now, to sum it up, basically, the Crusades, and this thought was an expansionist, imperialistic view directed by the Pope and brutalizing the local enlightened population and colonizing territory of peaceful peoples. That is the biggest mess of horsemen I've ever heard in my entire life. Because the idea of colonization was never an idea. But in the 1900s, when the empires were coming over and colonizing and basically carving up the Middle East, that idea was in the history at that moment, and they were calling their colonization and civilizing the Eastern world as the New Crusades. This is what the first Crusaders did, and they proposed that and continued to roll that forward, so that's where another part of it kind of got put. So we can sort of blame the British and the French empires for that. And basically, I mean, literally taught the people there that we are here because we want to be like our Crusader people in the past who colonized you and did this and this and this. So when we hear that back and that push, the reason we were fighting against you is because you came here as colonizers back in the day when right before they began to go over there, they didn't remember the greatest person in the Crusades on their side called Saladin the Great. I'll give a little story about that one. There was a little known man called Kaiser Wilhelm II. Yeah, we kind of know who that is. He went to visit Syria, and he wanted to visit the various sites, and he was in Damascus and was walking around asking to see the tomb of Saladin, who was one of the great generals, and he was respected on both sides because he did battle with Richard the Lionheart from England, and they had this, warrior respect for one another because they were each formidable foes. So Kaiser Wilhelm, hearing all these stories and reading all these histories from, forever and a day ago, wanted to come and see the tomb of the great General Saladin. We got there, started asking around, and it took him 4 days to find someone who even heard of him. He got there, and someone finally found the place where his tomb was, and it was literally a heap of ruins and barely even visibly marked. And he was horrified because for him and for most Europeans at the time and in general, they're like, you put giant monuments on your famous people's graves. That's just what you do. So he commissioned out of his own funds to build the modern tomb of Saladin. So what you see now today in Damascus, if you look it up, it's a large statue of bronze and very built up columns and what have you, dedicated in honor of Saladin the Great. And he basically was like, you've never heard of Saladin the Great? Like, no. And it was almost like, it was, the reason for this, this was just kind of anecdotal, but people in the East did not really even think of the Crusades as the Crusades. That wasn't in their historical thought process. To them, it was just a couple battles back in the day, because now we're getting to where we're setting up the beginning of what the onus was.
Have you ever seen Julius Caesar's grave?
No, I have not.
It's a little, there's nothing there.
I think people do put flowers beside it because they just like their
Not big they had when I was there, but.
Yeah. So I have to use his numbers because I was lazy. But what kind of brought this, the beginning of the Crusades, before even the Crusades, I can get my numbers out. There we go. Was before the Crusades, starting in mid-600s, when Muhammad was still alive. At his death, he ordered his people to go and take the West, continue on to Jerusalem, and go beyond into Europe. And so his death, people took his word, maybe a year or two later, they got their stuff up, and they head towards the West. So, let me get my dates, because I want to at least try to get the dates in general. We have in, okay, so there at that moment was still the remnants of the Eastern Byzantine Empire. So we have the Greek Empire there still, what's left of it holding right there. So at this point, they swept through North Africa and the lower half of the empire, meaning not all the way up into the Holy Land, but kind of the bottom half, you know, that little part that kind of dips down before it gets to where we have the Suez Canal now. So they went west, went to North Africa. Alexander fell in 642, and then eventually all the way all through Northern Africa, and then into Spain in 714, and then all the way up to Tours, France, in about 732. And but then we got to 831, and there were hordes. I would say hordes because there was hordes. Invaded Sicily and took and occupied Sicily. Also took and occupied southern Italy, and then eventually in 846, Rome was sacked and occupied briefly, but the people fought them out of Rome. So they were literally just kind of at the boot of Italy, all the islands below, North Africa, Spain, Portugal for the most part. Spain, you had just a little bit at the top still left, and then on into France. And they were continually pushing through France, but the French were going to have none of it. And I only remember his title because it's quite fun. The Hammer.
Charles Martel.
Charles Martel, the Hammer, basically said he put down the hammer. He said, "You're not coming any further into France." So because there was a stall at this point, and they were kind of at the edge of the advances in France, and a large majority of the people who were there, who were the invaders, actually settled, converted to Catholicism, and things kind of quieted down for a bit. But then eventually it was a constant battle for that end into Spain. Now we'll get a little bit into that later. Now, what was the final straw, if that wasn't enough, you know, you're debating, you're kind of doing the pincer movement here, coming in between, was in 1009, and this was the final, this was like the straw that broke the camel's back. The Fatimid Caliph at that time Jerusalem was taken, it was sacked, it was horribly massacred. And what they did was to literally provoke the Christians, he ordered the Church of the Holy Sepulchre destroyed and turned into a manure heap. And that was the refuge dump. And he wrote a boasting letter to that to various Christian leaders. And it was referred to then, after that point, as the Church of the Dungeon. So it was literally to be a big punch in the face to all Christians. And the area where the temple was, it was left, people didn't build on the area for the main fact that the Jewish people did not want to go up there because they did not know where the Holy of Holies had been placed, so they didn't want to accidentally desecrate the area. So it was cordoned off. We're not going to go up on top of the Temple Mount. Leave it be, because if we go up there, we don't want to offend God in accident. So that was, you hear the stories about how it was abandoned and it was just, in dead ruins, and they weren't doing anything with it, so they decided to build stuff there. They didn't want to go up there for fear, piety's sake. But then eventually the Dome of the Rock was built there, and we know about that today. So backing up a little bit here, so we see all these things that are happening, and so they established themselves all the way up to the edge near Constantinople. And so again, in 1080, Pope Gregory was wanting to actually start a crusade for the simple fact that he was seeing what was happening. Okay, but he was dealing with a lot of stuff at that moment. Had a lot on his plate. He said issues in the west, further west in the empire, and various other stuff. Later we moved to Blessed Urban, we went from St. Gregory to Blessed Urban. These were not the blessed saints at this time period. But we had in this time period, Blessed Urban received a letter, very unusual letter, from the Emperor of the East and the Patriarch of the East. Now remember, there was a schism, and they didn't particularly care for one another. There was, things had kind of cooled off, and they were, okay, we have a relationship now. But you wouldn't be calling on one another for favors, which is what's happening. And it wasn't just a favor. It literally says in the letter, I beg and go down on my knees for assistance and help. My people are being slaughtered, and they are at the gates of the city as we speak. Please help. And this was like you know, you gotta know these people. These are like, in any way you look at it, it would be as if you had Donald Trump, Theresa May, Angela Merkel, and she's not the president of France, but Marine Le Pen, getting on their knees and begging someone for something. Now, people with that much, you know, onus of power and pride and ego, nobody's going to be going down on anybody's knee, begging anybody anything. But this is what happened. Literally, it was a pleading letter. I mean, the Pope was brought to tears by it. And they were reading parts of it to the people, and they were in shock and horror at some of the very graphic details of what was been happening. And these have been corroborated with other stories and diaries and stuff from the Middle East at the time. I'll read a little bit of it. It's quoted in here, but some of the stuff I was kind of, I don't know if I will say because it makes me queasy, but that's saying a lie. But just from a little bit of it, many of God's churches have been violated. They've ruined the altars with filth and defilement. They had forcibly circumcised Christians and smeared the blood on the altars of the church, or poured into baptismal fonts. It amused them to kill Christians by opening up their belly. This is the part that if you have queasiness, you might want to close yours. It amused them to kill Christians by opening up their bellies, drawing out the end of their intestines, which they tied to a stake, then flogged them, and had the victims walk around until, until various things spilled out. And then the letter goes on and says, "What I shall say about the abominable rape of our women. On this subject, it may be better not to say anything at all. It'd be worse to speak." But this, was part of the things that were going on. And when pilgrims, because pilgrims would freely go to the Holy Land in general, so you would have, like you would have today, except maybe not, going, and there'd be, decent groups, unarmed for the most part. They had a couple of, people on horseback with them, because you could not take arms with you on crusade, on pilgrimages. It was forbidden. That's why most people kind of kept their area of pilgrimaging up where it wasn't so dangerous, like in France or somewhere like that. But many that would go down. One of the accounts was that 600 Christians were crucified on the way to Damascus, because they, as they put it, we're going to crucify you like your dead God, because we were the whole thing. Muslims believe that Christ was not actually crucified, and crucifixion was actually happened quite often, and other things that were kind of really, really more brutal than what was reported here, which I'm not going to get into detail because I make it sick. But these things were kind of the beginning and onus of what's kind of happening, and so I'm glad this is just like the intro of you. But what was going on and what was leading up to the Crusades, again, there was, when the Holy Land was taken all over to Jerusalem, there was no tolerance for other religions at all. If you were a Jew, you had to wear this huge block of wood around your neck, and wear brightly comical clothing, and had to take anything that other people gave you, meaning that they'd rough you up, to say the nicest possible language. But you had to be identified as a Jew, and you were taxed to no end. And you were basically, it was done this way so that you could either convert, or you could pay the tax, leave, or if you don't want to do any of that, you're dispatched. Which was a common practice, and it's in the Quran to do that. But they did this so that they wanted you to convert. So they kind of forced you to convert, basically. We're going to make your life so miserable that you want to become a Muslim.
Let me make sure I'm clear.
Yeah.
What were they converting to?
Islam?
Islam, yes.
Where
So,
was this? In what
this,
territory, city, or country?
the whole swath all the way up through present-day Israel, all the way up to where, near
Middle East,
Constantinople.
okay.
Yeah, and then through North Africa, but still enforced, depending on which place. They got a little bit more creative in different places. But Christians had to wear crosses around their necks that were like weighted and made of massive blocks of wood. They also had to wear colorful outfits that made them look comical. They couldn't wear normal clothing because they had to be pointed at and seen and pay enormous taxes on. And the same deal, they were basically brutalized and basically made your life miserable unless you convert to Islam, and then you don't have to do all that stuff. Okay, so this kind of sets up the stage to why the emperor sent the letter and things like that, because it was getting really, really bad. They were at the gates of Constantinople, the biggest, and almost, I mean, it could also be considered the third holy city. I mean, in our view, it would be the second, the first being Jerusalem. But so they send a letter to the blessed Urban, thank you. And so in 1096, Blessed Urban reads this letter to crowds in France. He's French, so he went to France. My people have a devotion to the Holy Land, Jerusalem specifically, because they had replicas of the Holy Sepulchre everywhere. And they, Jerusalem was it. They had a huge devotion to the sepulchre itself and to the understanding of that. And so it was great devotion, and people who could afford it would go pilgrimage constantly. But when he went there and he got to the part about what was going on with the Holy Sepulchre and stuff like that, people weren't necessarily enraged, but they were more saddened and upset and distraught. And so he began to talk, and he, giving the appeal, and he did this throughout Europe. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux preached about the Crusades when he got the letter as well. So did Saint Catherine of Siena, Saint Francis of Assisi, I got a long list of saints here. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, especially in the first one, because she was all around the first one. But, so these different things were happening. And the First Crusade was not organized by any government, was not organized by any knights, was not organized by anything like that. It was actually a couple of low-level people, like dukes, earls, and things like that, who didn't really have a lot of money anyway, but they offered themselves at least to organize. There was 200,000 people on the First Crusade, 60,000 of which were actually soldiers. So out of the 200,000, 60,000 were actually people who know what to do with themselves when they came to fight. So they divided off into 4 different armies, or different groups, led by different nobles from various houses, and literally it was just like, Earl Bob from house such and such, and they were kind of organizing this group and going to various places. I won't go through the long list because it's way out there. But they organized and met at the Bosphorus Straits, and crosses over to the east. So they get, or the west, east, thank you. It gets so confusing when you get in that area. You're crossing over to the Middle East. And so Emperor Alexander, a little bit nervous, who wouldn't be when you have 200,000 people show up your door. He very quickly gets them across the Bosphorus, and they set out on their way. The First Crusade was incredibly successful. And I mean incredibly successful, I mean it was an absolute success. They went through and took, the first couple of cities like Damascus, all those countries, you just kind of, Antioch, all coming down to that area, and they stopped, basically, the border of Egypt. Wherever the Holy Land ended, they stopped, they went no further, and that was it. They weren't going to go anymore. So at this time, they went through and, they had, battles, and one of the things we have to remember in this time period, we have to look at it from their viewpoint and not ours, because when we put in our viewpoint on any time period in history, they're always going to be barbarians. I mean, you look at medicine 100 years ago, they were still cutting people's limbs off. This was not good. It was barbaric. So we have to kind of look at it from their eyes as well. So when you hear the stories about people running into the villages and town, basically sacking the entire town, killing you, providing path, the tactic was, if you go to the city gates, hi, y'all want to go ahead and just surrender? Some places that just happened. They're like, yay, okay, whatever. Everybody go about your business. Okay, you don't have to wear that anymore. Christians, you're good. And they actually tolerated the Muslims, and everything was, for the most part. If, however, there was a greater resistance, it was it was the practice of warfare at that time. They should sack the city because you could tell friend from foe, and you're just kind of going through the village or whatever. Now, and also at this time period, like many people of our own day, like to exaggerate and use extraordinarily hyperbole when discussing things that happened in that time period. So you would not go to your emperor or your king and say, "Oh yes, we won Jerusalem. It took a couple of this and this and this." No king wants to do that. We gloriously opened the gates of Jerusalem, and we slew the enemy and took them down, slaying all people in our path. We were up to our ankles in blood. We chased the infidels out, and we had our flag upon the ruins of the Holy Sepulchre and the temple of King David. You want to hear that? You don't want to hear, "We took Jerusalem, sir." Well, great. So they use this, as anybody would. You would make it so grandiose and so wonderful, so bombastic, such extraordinary heights. It would seem like the heavens opened, the angels were battling with us, and it was Godzilla versus King Kong. It was just like an immense army, all these horrible clashes. And anyway, they did come and take the city. It was, normal warfare of the time. And they took the city, and they held the Holy Land for over 200 years. So minor skirmishes off the borders, but they took care of that. And it was held for 200 years. Later, the rest of the Crusades were not that successful. Okay, the reason that it did not keep after 200 years is because no one wanted to stay, because it was a pilgrimage. Why would you stay in a pilgrimage? We're here, we help you liberated. Groups stayed to kind of secure the area to keep the peace. And it was set up in a kind of the, normal political system at the time, which was kind of a feudal system, counties, fiefs, and various things like that. But it went back to normal. Even later on in various crusades in North Africa, some of North Africa was freed up for the most part.